Hi, everybody. It's Jenny.
And this is Alexa.
And we're back for another edition of the podcast. Today, we are podcasting Fallout by Gwenda Bond. If you're not familiar with Fallout, it is a young adult novel about a teenage Lois Lane. It's super fun, and we are really excited because joining us today on the podcast is the author, Gwenda Bond herself. Gwenda Bond is from right here in Lexington, Kentucky, and she is also the author of Girl on a Wire, which is part of the Cirque American series, and a new series she writes with her husband, Christopher Rowe, called the Supernormal Sleuthing Service, about a boy who lives in a hotel for monsters. I've already got this one on hold. I'm so excited about it. But today, of course, we're going to talk about Lois Lane, and welcome Gwenda Bond.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. So we're going to jump right in. We usually say that this is not a spoiler-free podcast. Alexa and I want to try to keep this one as spoiler-free as we can because we really want to encourage you guys to go out and get the book. It's just a wonderful, wonderful read. In the book, Lois Lane has just moved to Metropolis with her father, who is an Army general, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And she, on her first day at school, has a pretty funny run-in with the school principal, and kind of is already making a name for herself as a rabble-rouser. And this interaction is seen by someone who works with the Daily Planet, who has started a teen version of a newspaper called the Daily Scoop, and he offers Lois a job. So Lois goes to work on the teen version of the Daily Planet, which we all know will be her grown-up job as well. And she starts investigating some cyberbullying with one of her classmates who feels like she's being almost like mind-controlled by a group of kids at her school that call themselves the Warheads.
Right.
And they are playing like what would you call it? The kind of game they're playing?
VR. It's a virtual reality game. Yeah. And they're kind of using that to, harass this fellow student.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess our first question for you, Gwenda, is why Lois? What drew you to Lois Lane as a character to write?
So I've always loved Lois Lane. She was the first, one of the first working women I ever saw on TV, and my mom was very much a feminist, even though we were in small town Kentucky. She was the first woman principal at the high school there. And we grew up watching, Murphy Brown and all of those. There was kind of a spate of not that many, but a few little things, I remember watching Silkwood with her. She was always hungry for those sorts of things. And Lois Lane was really the first character I saw who reminded me of my mom, so super competent working woman who was confident and really didn't take any crap from anybody. And then I started stealing my brother's Superman comics. So Lois Lane really did speak to me. And in fact, I was approached by DC, contacted my agent and asked if I'd be interested in writing a series about young Lois Lane. And it really wasn't until that moment that I had stopped to examine how influential she had been in my kind of personal pantheon of heroes.
Wow. So what was it like working with DC? Did you have to sign super secret contracts and go out to their buildings and all that stuff?
No, it never works like this. So I always give that caveat when I tell this story because I have lots of friends who've done this kind of work, and I am doing some other things with established characters or working on them that have taken a lot more discussion. They really recruited me heavily for this, and it came together almost immediately. And my only question was whether I'd have freedom to make it my own, and they said yes. And I thought, well, we'll see. And they were very true to their word. I had an editor at Capstone who's the publisher, and then Warner Brothers, we had an editor there too who was on the DC side, and they worked really well together. It was a great team. I think everybody was on the same page. I did have to sign an NDA, and they, of course, when I'm writing the book, the first book especially, it isn't announced yet, and that they could just cancel this if they don't like what you send in. But luckily, that did not happen. They were very nervous because they had never really done anything like this before, and now they've planned a bunch more stuff based, I think, on the positive response that we got to these books.
Yeah, it's been. I read some of the reviews. It's been very well reviewed. One of the favorite reviews compared it to Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets Veronica Mars.
Yes, those are my favorite things.
Yeah,
just absolutely, I was like, oh, well, I have to read this now.
Yeah, sold.
Exactly. She's such a strong character. And how do you feel like this Lois is different from other versions of Lois Lane?
So I did a lot of thinking when I was approaching the first draft of this book about what are the core traits of Lois Lane in good portrayals versus bad portrayals. Obviously, you want to do the first and not the second. And I think there are some core things that are kind of common throughout all of the... I mean, there have been some really great Loises in media, especially. In fact, most of her problematic depictions are in comics, and when you are in comics for, over 70 years, you're going to have some lackluster. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, Lois Lane in the comics reflects what's going on for women in the larger culture at any given time. Yeah. Tim Hanley wrote a book called Investigating Lois Lane, which the library has, I believe, which talks about these books and Lois in general. So if you're interested in her history, I definitely recommend that. He's a very good writer, just really easy to read in a way that nonfiction sometimes is not, and really understands the character inside and out. And I really wanted to honor her past. I love all that 30s and 40s fast-talking newsroom banter. And, the original Superman movie, what drew me in, I think, is how much it owed to that kind of newsroom romantic comedy sort of vibe. That's very much the way I see Lois and Clark, as equals, because that was the kind of relationship that those movies portrayed, which is kind of ironic that we don't always see that these days in romantic comedies, and that the women often were sort of fighting against kind of societal restrictions. And so I think what's different is that Lois doesn't have some of the barriers that other generations of the character may have faced in the workroom in terms of women just being taken seriously. So a lot of this Lois's challenges come from the fact that she's still being formed, right? Most of the time when we meet Lois Lane, she's already a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. She's never really had an origin story of her own, like how did she get there? And I think there is a vulnerable side. One of the things you can do in a novel that's difficult to do in other things is show the interior of a character. And so you get a little bit more nuance than sometimes you get from just seeing how tough she is to the people on the outside. Absolutely. So I think that's really the core difference. But I hope there's a lot of similarities too.
One of the things I loved that you said in an interview I read, I think a lot of people think of Lois Lane as kind of a damsel in distress because she's always getting into trouble and she needs Superman to save her. And you said, no. You said heroes get into trouble. Yeah. She's out pursuing the bad guys and doing great work. Yeah. And she doesn't have superpowers. No, but she's using her her journalistic prowess to go after the bad guys, and so she's gonna get into trouble. That's what happens.
Absolutely. I mean, trouble is what superheroes do. And Superman also saves the world a lot. Right. And we don't think the world is dumb.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I feel like Lois is, and even in a more like in a higher way. For me, Lois Lane is who Superman sees as a hero. She is very much part of his model of what a hero is because it's about your character, not about what you can do.
That's so true. That's one of my favorite kind of aspects of any sort of Superman Lois Lane portrayal. It's just how much Superman thinks Lois is just the coolest thing ever. Superman loves Lois Lane. I think it's so adorable. It's here's this literal alien god who flew down to Earth and saves us the entire planet on our daily basis. And she's like, man, Lois is a great journalist. He just really loves Lois, and it's just so touching. And I think that you did a good job of capturing that. I mean, slight spoiler, Superman is in this book. You don't actually...
I don't think that's a spoiler. I mean, I always feel bad for younger people who don't know, and they're like, is it? And I'm like, yes.
One of the reviews that I read was some people might not get that Smallville guy is Clark Kent, and so I was like, was that supposed to be a secret? No. I don't know.
Lois has an online friend who can handle Smallville guy, who we all know.
Yes.
We figure out pretty early on is
he's out there naming milking cows, and
Teenage Clark Kent out in Kansas.
making his avatar in the VR universe, Alien.
And I don't think it's spoilery to say that because it's in the flap copy for the third book,
Okay,
that eventually she even knows, right? Like,
Right.
Eventually everyone, it's confirmed.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
I mean, whenever you've been a franchise for 70 years.
All the secret identities of everyone who you don't know in books 1 and 2 is answered in book 3.
Got it. But I think that's one of the really sweet things in this book is the online relationship between Superman
so
and
fun to
Lois.
write.
It was really, really portrayed cutely. I think it's adorable, and it was so fun getting to see them. I mean, she has so much anxiety over who is this guy when he tell me his secrets, and I don't know. That was definitely my favorite part of the book. I think was just their relationship.
I love
being
writing
played
them.
out. It was great.
Love writing them.
You guys see her vulnerable side.
Yeah.
With him, her insecurities and her anxieties around this budding relationship, and she didn't. To the rest of the world, she was tough, gutsy.
It's funny, because in the outline for book 1, on the very first page in the overview, it was, this is the only person that she allows herself to be vulnerable with.
Yeah.
And I mean, I do think that's a core part of both of their relationship. I mean,
Yeah.
she's one of the few people later on who, Clark trusts with his secret because he knows that she would never divulge it.
So, speaking of different portrayals of Lois Lane, do you have a favorite portrayal? Amy Adams is a recent one. I know you mentioned before we started recording that you met Margot Kidder recently, which is amazing.
Margot Kidder was my first Lois, so she has to be my favorite. I did get to meet her. We were at both guests at the Superman celebration, and it was a little overwhelming. She was so cool, and I told her about the books, and she asked about young Lois, and I got to tell her, which you don't often get the chance to do, that I wouldn't have the career that I have now if I hadn't seen her as Lois Lane growing up. And she was just delightful.
Oh.
But I love all of the Loises, and one of the things I love about them is that they have tended to be very supportive of each other when they pass the torch. And there have often been cases, like the Superman movie is a great example, where Noelle Neal is young Lois's mom on the train, and she, of course, was an earlier generation's Lois. So I think it's cool. And I was at we did a discussion about these books and Lois Lane in general, and I asked the audience in Metropolis, Illinois, if who everybody's first Lois was, and it was a huge range in the crowd. And for a lot of the younger people, it's Dana Delaney, right, from the animated adventures, and she's a great Lois. I think there have been so many good ones. Amy Adams really seems to like playing Lois. I hope we get to see a little more like bantering newsroom stuff in future movies, and some scenes too with more scenes with Amy Adams and Gal Gadot, because I thought they had great chemistry together and seemed to just be like best friends in all of the
Gal Gadot
pictures.
is such a sweet Wonder Woman. She's adorable.
So good.
She's so good. She's really cute.
And Lois Lane and Wonder Woman have had some great moments in the comics over the years, so I hope we get some.
Do you have a
some of
dream
that.
cast for your Lois?
I never know actors. Somebody asked me this yesterday online, and I was like, young Rosalind Russell.
They were like, huh?
I never know any actors' names, but I don't know. I think it would be. I would love to see. I think it's time for a Lois to be cast as a person of color.
Yeah.
Like I would love to see that kind of casting done. Like if Supergirl cast Lois Lane,
That would be really cool.
The
Yeah.
girl from the Hunger Games would be great.
Oh,
Yeah.
Amanda Stenberg.
Oh yeah, I love her.
She would be a great Lois.
She would. She would.
Get on
Yeah.
that, Hollywood.
I'm really excited for everything. I think that she'll do a really good job in that. I'm
Yeah,
super
yeah.
excited about that.
Yeah. Nicola Yoon is the nicest person.
Oh, really? She seems really sweet based on
Yes.
all of the books that I've read by
She
her.
is so supportive of everybody
Aw.
and so nice. Yeah, it's always nice to see people who are truly wonderful get the success and
Aw.
readership.
Well, one of the other things I love about this Lois is her friend group, which I know you refer to as the Scooby Gang, which I love. How important was it for you to have Lois have kind of like a tribe around her?
It really was. I think of Superman, and you can see this in Supergirl too, is really an ensemble property. It's always been about Superman and kind of his relationships with a revolving cast of people, but there are some real standards there, like Jimmy and Perry and Lois, obviously. Cat Grant sometimes, and Lex Luthor on the other side of things. And so I wanted to preserve that and give Lois her own ensemble. And I didn't want to use people who, kind of belong to Clark, because I felt like that would upset sort of the balance of I really wanted people to walk away from these books feeling like they could imagine their favorite Superman and Lois, growing out of them. And so I really didn't want to recast people who clearly are Clark's friends first as Lois's friends first, because it feels like it wouldn't work. And I wanted to give her some new characters, and it's fun to create new characters in the DC world. And so I do love a Scooby Gang. I was a huge Buffy fan. And to me, that's part of the fun of kind of a setup like this. And with the newsroom, you're going to have a crew of people surrounding her. I just really enjoy that. Like, I do kind of approach these books almost like a TV series. Like, with each book is kind of a seasonal arc, and you're there for the characters and their relationships in the world more so than the main plot. Because I love TV. And I love open-ended book series. I love open-ended series. I'm a big fan of open-ended series. I read some trilogies and things like that, but sometimes that format can feel forced, and we specifically agreed to kind of leave this where it could end at any point or it could go on forever.
That's such a smart way to go about it. I think that's the best way to do books and TV series. But
yeah, you never know what's going to happen, and it you leave yourself more options too, as because you change over the course of time, and if you have locked yourself into a story that you decided on 3 years ago, but really your concerns have changed.
Yeah,
it can be difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked a bit about creating Lois's kind of Scooby Gang from scratch, and you talked about reading all of the past Superman comics and everything. Whenever you knew that you were going to write this book series and you started kind of getting into it, did you go back and kind of delve into past Lois interpretations, or did you just try and wipe all that clean and start with a fresh slate?
I did a little bit of both. I revisited some of my favorite moments and did a lot of thinking and rewatched some of my favorite things. But at a certain point, pretty quickly, actually, I'd say like a week or two. And I had a very tight deadline for the first book, so it was not like I had a bunch of time to procrastinate. Sure. I mean, I just realized that if I kept revisiting stuff, I would, and I never watched we watched the first season of Smallville, which Lois is not on, because of the weird CW affiliate thing that Lexington had for many years. We did not get it, and so we didn't go back and watch it, and I had to ask the question of, that's really the closest thing to a teen Lois, should I watch it or not? And I decided that I didn't want somebody else's voice in my head, but I always take it as a compliment when people who are fans of Smallville say it feels like that Lois, because people really like her in the Lois Lane fandom. But I think that anytime you're tackling an iconic character, you do need to immerse yourself enough to understand them. And hopefully, if you're the right person for the gig, you understand them pretty much already. Yeah. Because you eventually do have to kind of set aside all the history and just do your own thing, and you can't try to you've got to please yourself first as a fan of the character, I think.
Yeah, as somebody who's read a lot of fan fiction in my life, it seems like it would be really scary to kind of walk that balance of people in comment section screaming, "Oh, OC, it's too out of character."
I'm really glad it wasn't announced until I had already written the first book,
right? And
it still was funny to watch people speculate based on the little paragraph that was online, and it's like, nope.
Yeah, people get really particular about how they think established characters should behave.
I have been very lucky. I mean, that definitely was a worry, and that anytime you're writing a character who already has a fandom, right? There is a real risk that your portrayal will be hated, and you have zero control over that.
Right.
I have been very lucky in that the Lois Lane community, and there are some real core members of that, and the comic book in general world has really embraced this project and been so welcoming, which is not always the case.
No,
so I'm very believed, I think it helped, like Tim Hanley, who I mentioned earlier, was writing his Lois Lane book when this was announced, and he had gotten an early copy so he could include it in the last chapter. And he wrote me a really sweet letter. That was one of the first reactions that I got about how much he enjoyed it, how it was nice to be able to have a high note to end the book on. And I was like,
weight off the shoulders.
Because I knew that, like, if Tim Hanley likes it, like, I didn't get everything wrong. So
it was very relieving.
It was.
Yeah.
Well, I did not. I did not grow up watching a whole lot of Superman, though the Lois and Clark series was on when I was in middle school, and I did watch that with my brother. But I didn't read the comics or anything like that. But one of the things that I felt that was so great about this series is that if you're not a comic fan or you didn't grow up with it, you can jump right in and immerse yourself in it. And the world you've built is so real, and you just kind of jump right in. And even, this virtual reality game they're playing, which there's really no real counterpart to it, but I felt like you did such a great job of explaining it to us. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose that and where that came from, and maybe even a little bit about her sister's creepy unicorn world?
That was so great. That was a great detail.
That got added in edits. The Lucy's game got added in edits, and it's still one of my favorite things.
Super cool unicorn gang. It's great.
It's funny because I'm not a video gamer at all. But the Gamergate was going on when I was thinking about this. And I do know that there are a lot of we constantly see like studies come out where it's like 50 or 60% of gamers are girls, but everyone thinks of them as thinks of gamers as men, and with the different kinds of games, and also just the politics of it, how, there was just so much about how harassing, like kind of what do you look, I'm blanking on the actual name. Whatever those games are called that you play, multiplayer, like...
Oh, yeah, MMORPGs.
Yes.
That's a multiplayer online role-playing game.
That. So I wanted to use a game like that. I did actually read... It's funny you should ask about research, because I did actually read, like, Tom Bissell has a essay collection about being a drug addict and also being addicted to video games, where he, and he interviews a lot of people about video games and did a lot of thinking about it. And some of these ran in Harper's. I read that, kind of philosophically about what the limits of games were. And I kind of just wanted to have a little bit of everything nerdy in one big pot so that I could have whatever kind of jokes I wanted. I did not realize when I wrote the outline for the first book, I created the VR game, and in the outline, there were never any scenes with Lois and Clark in the game. I realized very quickly when I started writing, Subconscious created this VR game so I can have scenes with them in the same place.
Right, yeah.
And I did not ask for permission to change, even though it was a big change. I just felt like they'll say no if I ask, but if I do it and they like these scenes, they'll leave them in. And in fact, when my editor from Warner Brothers sent back the manuscript, he did his notes in pen, and so my other editor's assistant typed them in, and it was like all of those scenes, like heart drawn in margin.
That's so great. It's so much more effective when you write it out like that.
It is.
That's really funny.
And so, I wanted to tackle some of those things, but in a science fictional way. And so I did a little bit of research on the science. But the great thing about comic book science is you can make it do whatever you want.
Yeah.
That's sort of the history of super science, is just to have, and I wanted to use things that had been in the Superman mythos at various stages. And bullying is obviously something that is very both intrinsic to Lois Lane's character, that she is very anti-bullies and will stand up to them, but also something that so many kids face. I remember a reader coming to one of my first events at Malaprops in Asheville after the first book came out, and she was just like, I was very badly bullied in high school. I'm out of that now, and your book made me realize all the Lois Lanes in my life who stood up for me or helped me get through that, which was pretty great. So that was kind of where that's kind of where the virtual reality game piece came from.
So was Gamergate happening at that time? What kind of inspired you to include the cyberbullying? plot line.
Yes, I remember my editor had asked if we should use the word doxing to describe something that Lois did, and I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Lois would never dox anyone.
No, never. Oh my god, that Gamergate thing was.
Yeah.
I had almost forgotten about that until you mentioned
It was really. I mean, it definitely was. It definitely was in full awful swing.
Yeah. That was something. Were you familiar with Gamergate when that was going on?
Yeah.
That was for those of you who don't know, Gamergate was a situation online when a gaming journalist who worked for Kotaku wrote an article reviewing a game. People in the comments thought that she had a relationship with the creator of the game. A whole thing snowballed out of that. Everyone started doxing her, which is finding out where she lived, her true identity online.
I mean, death threats.
It was horrible. And it just kind of snowballed, and it started including all these other different women.
Yeah.
And then it kind of just basically turned into a full-fledged internet attack on women who play games.
Yeah, just a huge harassment.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
It got out of hand so quickly. And now that you mentioned Gamergate, it's like I totally see that was the inspiration for this book. Yeah, that totally works.
Well,
Absolutely.
the warheads are super creepy.
Yes.
They're kind of the bad guys in the book, and they are if you sort of imagine like the kind of people who would dox someone and send death threats, it's these guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of a really good face for just like the nameless anonymous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Online.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good portrayal of that. They really are. So Superman, we've talked a bit about him being present in the book, but only being seen in virtual reality or online in the chat transcripts. Did you know going into it that you weren't going to have Superman show up?
I knew that he would be her online long-distance friend, and I suspected that I would not be allowed to have him show up.
Because you thought DC was like too protective of him?
Yeah, they're pretty protective of both of these characters, and I don't think that it would have been the right decision to have him there in the first book. By the time we got to book 3, I think the level of trust, even book 2, like the level of trust was so high that it wasn't even an issue. Like my editor asked, and they're like, "Of course, like,
take Superman, have him do whatever."
He does finally appear in book 3,
yes.
right? They get to meet.
Yeah, he's in like half the book. Yeah. It's the whole fam comes to Metropolis. I don't think that's too spoiler.
No.
You know they're going to end up together.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tease. It's to intrigue people into reading through book 3.
And getting to write their like first date scenes in real life. I mean, like those are some of the most fun things I've ever written. My goal was just like to make it. I mean, I really wanted book 3 to just feel like a giant hug. I've said this. I just wanted it to delight everybody who's fans of the series. I wanted to pay off their investment in those two characters and their relationship.
True fan service.
Yes.
Absolutely. So what else are you guys working on at the moment? You and...
So Christopher and I, my husband and I, have the first book in our new series, The Lost Legacy, in the Supernormal Sleuthing Service. Series just came out, which is about a hotel for monsters in New York City and 3 kids who live there and solve mysteries together. It just came out, and we've been having a lot of fun promoting that. I don't recommend having 2 books come out in the same month. It makes for a very long month. So we're working on, we just turned in the second one, so we'll get edits back on that at any time. And Christopher also has a short story collection coming out this summer, so I'm very proud of that. I have, my first book is being reissued in a slightly different version by the publisher of Lois Lane in August. And will be called Strange Alchemy now. It was originally Blackwood, so I'm glad to have that coming back. I'm also working with a company called Serial Box on a serial called Remade. I have to go finish editing an episode after I leave here, actually. It's kind of a TV writer setup. It's like there's a writer's room, and we all take episodes, but it's written an audiobook, and new episodes get released every week.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a really neat thing. And then I'm just working on some secret things, some secret calls with some secret companies.
It's a busy summer.
See. It is a busy summer. We'll see what's happening.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. For everybody at home, go get Fallout. The library has multiple copies. Go check it out. After you read Fallout, you can read Double Down and Triple Threat. the 3 in the series that are out right now. And definitely check out Gwenda and Christopher's series, Super Normal Sleuthing Service. I'm on hold for it. I cannot wait to read it. I'm so excited. And of course, The Girl in a Wire, which is part of the Cirque American series as well. Thank you so much for joining us, Gwenda.
Thank you guys for having me. This was a blast.
Thanks, Gwenda. See you guys next time.